How to raise your child. And I believe we've spoken about this in the past also. In some sense, the discussion, making it a discussion, even creating a topic called child raising, feels a little artificial and contrived. What do you mean child raising? If a child lives in your house, you're raising the child. It's not a project. It's not something you can either do or not do. It's not something you forget to do a few days out of the week, and those days you were not raising your child. You're raising your child. Lives in your house, you're raising him. If you ignore him, then you're raising him with neglect. But that's your raise. So raising your children is a involuntary, ongoing aspect of life, not some kind of a project that we have to sit and plan or scheme about. So to some degree, just the fact that we even sit down to talk about it or have a lecture on the subject is harmful, because it makes it sound like some kind of special project. And of course it's not. Having children is part of life, and the way you live your life, that's how you raise your children. Of course, there are certain good ideas, helpful ideas on how to communicate, how to convey a message in its most effective way. You can do it better, you could do it worse, but you're doing it all the time. So just to back up a little bit and put the whole thing in perspective. Let's say in the olden days, a father would go out to work in the fields, and he would take his son with him. Not that the son can help, he's still a child. But that's how life was lived. When you went out to work, you took your child with you. On the horse, on the plow, wherever. The result was that a child learned about life by living it with his father or with his mother. School messed everything up. When people invented schools, they ruined everything. Because all of a sudden, children weren't spending time with their mother or father. They were sitting in a classroom reading books. When that became the major activity in a child's life for the most of the years of his childhood, something unnatural happened. The child doesn't know what life is. The child doesn't know the life of the parents. And in some way they became estranged from their family, from their parents, and live a life according to a writer, according to a book, according to a theory. Not a very healthy or happy way. As a result, raising children did become a topic, an activity. So when parents decide that they're going to be good parents, they start to do things that are not real. You have to buy your child toys. That's not natural. Children make their own toys. Children have their own fantasies. Adults, parents, creating fantasies for the children, there's something not right about that. First of all, you're usurping their role. And secondly, who says that adult fantasy is healthy for children? Keep your fantasies to yourself. So Disney World and Disney movies, and I don't know, is that good for children? Or is that really entertaining the adults? What has happened recently is that good parents, well-intentioned parents, devoted parents, mothers who will not go to work because they're stay-home mothers, what they actually do is they live their life and their day around the child. The child does not get to see adult life. The adult is living the child's life. You cater to the child. You get involved in the child's activities. You lower yourself to the child's level and live his life with him. And that's considered a devoted parent. Good parent. The way it really should be is, you live your life. And if you believe that the life you live is right and good, make sure your children are following. So just look back every now and then to make sure that they're still there and you haven't left them in the dust. But if you're not living a life worth living, and you're going to give your children a life, this is artificial. So you can't create the child's life other than letting him live your life. Adults should be busy living, should have an exciting life, should have a meaningful life, and children should run to keep up. That's the natural way of raising children. Every now and then, you have to stop and explain to the child what your life is all about, not tell the child how to live his life. Does this make sense? So instructing children doesn't mean tell them to go do things. They don't like that. They don't buy it. Instructing children means, now you've seen me behave this way or do these things, or let me tell you what it's about. Let me explain to you what I'm doing and why it's important. But if it's not your life, what are you explaining? A theory? A plan that somebody made up and decided that's how children should live? So, for example, you send a child to school, and the child is studying subjects that have nothing to do with your life. Maybe you never even studied those subjects. So what's a child supposed to make of this? It's very confusing. They see your life, but you're not letting them live that. You're telling them to go live a different life. That can't be good. It's like saying, I've got my life, go find your own. It's not nice. We're supposed to invite our children into our lives. And we're supposed to live a life that is not only right and good for the children, but so compelling that the child will want to be part of your life, will envy you, and hope to be like you. That, I guess, is an ideal situation. When you ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the child says, I want to be just like my daddy. That's perfect. Well, maybe not. It's good. Actually, you want your child to say, I want to be better than my daddy. We all want our children to be better than us. But better at the same thing, not living some other life that we're not familiar with. Unless you think that your life is not worth living. And you hope your child will find a life that is worth living. Well, that's a very depressing thought. For your child, too. It's an amazing thing that the attachment of children to their parents often cause children who could have a better life than their parents to refuse. Unconsciously, they refuse to be more successful than their parents, out of loyalty to the parents. So they will be talented, they will be capable, they'll have a business that can be far more successful than their parents, and they'll sabotage it out of loyalty to the father. Since the father was never that successful, I can't insult him by being more successful than my father. So when parents say to their children, I want for you all the things I never had, not a good message. Not a good message. It's almost like saying, I don't want you to be like me. Parents actually say that too. I want you to go to school and get good grades because I don't want you to end up like me. That is not a good message. Children want to stay loyal. Children are a continuation. To go start your own life, find your own world, live your own existence, that's not nice. It's not friendly. That's like throwing them out of the house. So raising children actually means make sure that the life you're living is good for your children. Somebody once asked me, there are so many gray areas, even when you know all the laws and all the mitzvahs, the do's and the don'ts, there's still so many gray areas. How do you know what's right when you come into the gray area? And I suggested that you keep a diary. What you're about to do, will you share that with your granddaughter when she's 5? And she says, tell me about your life. Will you be ashamed or proud to tell your 5-year-old granddaughter that this is what you did? If you're ashamed to tell your granddaughter, then don't do it. If you don't want your granddaughter to do the same, then don't do it. Because if it's not good enough for her, why is it good enough for you? So this is how we raise children. You raise children by living a life that the children will want to and should follow. And then, are you a great communicator? Maybe not. Can you explain things well so that the child can? Maybe not. Do you have a lot of time to spend with the child? Maybe not. Won't do any harm. The child sees you living and wants it. It's almost a no-brainer. And then raising children is not a project, not something you need time to do. You're doing it all the time. So when people say, you have to have, what is it called? Quality time with your children. And if you have 4 children, where are you going to find time? As if raising children is a project for which you have to take time out from your life in order to raise them. But it shouldn't be that way. It's not a project, and you don't take out time from life to give your kids a lecture. It's not necessary. So, I guess in some way, if we're doing everything right, we shouldn't even be conscious of the fact that we're raising children. It goes with life. It is life. The school that doesn't reinforce what your life is all about can now be very confusing and very damaging. So if you've given up raising your children, you've turned it over to the schools, you've turned it over to the books, that's that can't succeed, because children will never accept it. They will not sever their existence from your existence and willingly live a life that isn't yours. And if they do that, they will regret it, always. In the end, that cannot work. So the generation gap, back in the 60s, we were so excited about it. It felt like liberation, it felt like progress, it felt like a brave new world. We now realize it's none of the above. Generation gap is too painful. Nobody really accepts it in the end, because nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be severed from their ancestors, from their history, from who they really are. And to have your existence begin when you start school, that's way too shallow. So, get a life, not a good message. Get a life, which means there's nothing in your past that's worth repeating. There's nothing in your past worth keeping. Go start a new life. Your existence begins now. Well, then you're a mushroom. Mushrooms have no roots. To be rootless like that is alienation. And alienation doesn't feel good, because it's not the way it's meant to be. We need to be connected. We need to be connected not only to our parents, but to our grandparents and great-grandparents. And as far back as we can remember and preserve who we are, what our identity is, the stronger and the better we will be. Most ancient cultures, that exist today, draw their strength for everyday existence from their connection to the ancestors. The Chinese culture, the American Indian, the ancestors play a huge role in your identity and in the quality of your life. To be severed from the ancestry is like cutting off your lifeline. So we need to provide a life that the child wants to live and an identity that the child wants to preserve. You want to be part of your family. You want to be part of your ancestry. You want to be a member of the tribe. So some people say it takes a village, whatever that means. And some people say, belong to your tribe. You need to belong to your tribe. You need to have that connection to your bloodline. It's life itself. So, what does the Torah tell us about raising children? Actually, what the Torah says is how, at what schedule do you introduce your child into your life? So like in the olden days in the shtetl, at what age do you take your child with you to the synagogue? At what age do you pray together? At what age do you take him with you when you make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem? In other words, how do you gradually involve your child in the life you're living? That's the process of child raising. So when a child is old enough to speak, you teach him his first prayer, the prayer you say every morning. Not a prayer for children. So you've begun. You have started introducing your child to your life. It's like they have this, what is it called, bring your child to work day? Something like that, right? a certain day out of the year, you bring your child to the office, to wherever you work. Your child needs to know what you do. If you're not proud of what you do, that's a problem. If you don't want your child to do what you do, that's a problem. But those things that are your life, you should let your children see and encourage their participation at age-appropriate stages. So, even in your relationships, how you relate to your parents, you want your children to see that. And that's why you relate to your parents properly, because your child is going to see that, and you want them to relate to you well, so you got to model that. So you show your children how to talk to parents. You show your children how you speak to a rabbi, to an authority. You show your children how you speak to a customer. Whatever it is you want your child to have that is part of your life, you include the child, and the child learns from watching and observing and so on. By the time the child gets to be 13, if it's a boy, or 12 if it's a girl, now it is yours. Everything you saw me do, everything you see me do, everything Jews do, now it's yours. That's what Bar Mitzvah means. Parents who send their kids to Bar Mitzvah lessons but don't study Hebrew themselves, children hate that. Not because they don't want to learn, not because it's extra hours of classroom time, not because they're not interested in the subject, but because it's alienating them from you. And unconsciously, they resist that, they fight that. They don't like it. It feels like rejection. So if you force your kid to go to a certain program, you have to make sure that that program fits with life. Sooner or later, students rebel because the topics, the subjects that they're studying is not relevant to their lives. And that's why back in the 60s people wanted relevant subjects, which turned out to be silly subjects. But the irrelevant stuff made them crazy. What's the difference between a relevant or irrelevant subject? What determines whether it's relevant or irrelevant? Much of it goes back to the parents. If my parents are not living this, why do I need to know it? And if I do get to know it, and if I get involved in it, and if that becomes part of my life, then we're not on the same page anymore. We are drifting apart. You're cutting me out. You're sending me off to study something you're not interested in. So even if it's good for me, in some sense, it'll get me a better job, a better career, but you're throwing me out. You're severing our relationship. Nobody likes that. That's not good for anybody's soul. So to sum it up, living a life your child will envy is the finest way to raise children. You don't have to say anything. I mean, if it's done really right, you don't have to say anything. You don't argue with your child. You're not trying to convince them of anything. You let them see a life that they will envy, and then, of course, they're going to run to keep up with you. They're going to want what you have. What are the things that a child will envy? Every child. Because there will be some differences, but as a rule, What makes something enviable? What do people envy? There are two things, maybe more, but two that are universal. Number one, people envy that which is refined. If you do what everybody else does, but you do it nicer, everybody wants that. You can't argue with that. You can argue about whether this is appropriate or that's appropriate, whether this is the right thing or that's the right thing. And you'll have arguments with philosophical differences, and people will get very heated in defending their own positions, whether you're liberal or you're conservative or you're pacifist, or different opinions, very strongly held. But if you're doing something that the child does, and you do it more refined, more elegant, more delicate, everybody wants that. The other thing everybody wants is enthusiasm, pleasure. If they see you having pleasure, they want it. Nobody refuses pleasure. So these two things, refinement and pleasure, are irresistible. Nobody wants to think that they're doing what you're doing, but they're doing it klutzy. They're doing it crassly. If you do it better, if you do it more refined, they're going to want that. And of course, they're going to want the pleasure. If you combine these two things, if you live a life where you get pleasure from refined things, that is a double portion of envy. He will envy your refinement, and he will envy your pleasure. He could never turn his back on that. In order for that to happen, though, the child has to know the difference between refinement and meaningless, oversensitive, unnecessary pickiness or finicky. So if you're very particular about what you eat, is that refined or is that a little hung up on food? Refinement is irresistible. Finicky turns people off. Very often you hear children say, "My parents are so timid, they're so square, well, because they have to do things exactly this way, they're not flexible, that means that they're not seeing refinement, they're seeing unnecessary restrictions and idiosyncrasies. Real refinement, everybody wants. So for example, people come into a home where there's a real warmth between parents and children. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want a child who genuinely respects their parents? Now you'll come into a home where children are very respectful of the parents, but not out of respect, out of fear, out of timidity, out of oppression. That's not going to be pleasant, appealing, certainly not irresistible. And you instinctively know the difference. But when you see children who have a real, genuine sensitivity for their parents' honor, you can't resist that. Of course you want that. When you hear husband and wife, when you hear spouses speaking to each other with that special tone that is so appropriate to them, who doesn't want that? How could you not want that? So when you see people behaving in a refined manner, the children will envy that. And if you're doing it with a pleasure in the refined, there's no way that the child can walk away. Torah teaches us, if we do it right, Torah teaches us how to find pleasure in those things that are refined. How to find pleasure in things that are, and we call it spiritual, but that's not a good word. To find pleasure in the truth of something, which is not tangible. To know that you're doing something the right way. That's not tangible. Sometimes not even rational. But there's the right way. So for example, you teach a child to say thank you. So they'll say thank you, but not the right way. It's not a real thank you. When you see a child doing it the right way, that's irresistible. That's contagious. Torah tells us how to do it the right way. Most people want to be kind. What's the right way? Because sometimes they're kind and it's all wrong. It's a destructive kindness, a meaningless kindness. Torah tells us how to be kind. Torah tells us how to be tough, but the right way. Torah tells us how to worship, but not foolishly, the right way. That's what our ancestors have been refining for the last 4,000 years. And we've got it worked out pretty good. So we have a life to live that the children will envy. We just have to go ahead and do it. Take advantage of the tradition, the wisdom that has accumulated. We can do it. It's not a mystery. We don't have to invent the wheel. It's been done. So if we can find the pleasure in doing things that are special, you can't lose. Even if you don't know how to talk to your children, they'll come out fine. Make sense? Does it sound reasonable, unreasonable? Doable, undoable? Undoable? Not doable? I don't know. Sounds good to me. Actually, it was in New York last week. And, Crown Heights is a very mixed neighborhood. And I met with a priest, Catholic priest, of a church in Crown Heights. There's a lot of teenage crime and a lot of... and this guy, young guy, reminds me of Obama. Very educated, very elegant, very charismatic. He's changing the streets of Crown Heights. He's creating programs for children because there's nothing in Brooklyn. What do you offer a teenager? After school, where does he go? They hang around the streets. So in the good, warmer months, they hang around in the parks at least. But even there's crime because there's no supervision, there's no planned activities. And he's making a real difference in the street kids. So we got together. We were talking about what's going on with children these days. And it seems that the issues are the same on no matter what culture, no matter what religion, no matter what. It's all the same thing. So one of the things we talked about was telling children that God loves them used to be a very appealing and effective message. No more. And he said that that was his experience as well. Children don't feel needed. Love is not going to make up for that. In the olden days, you were needed, you were necessary, you were important. Now, if you were loved, that would make it all sweet. But first, you had to be needed. But today, kids don't think they're needed. They don't think they're necessary. So to tell them, well, you're not necessary, but God loves you, they're not buying it. They don't even like it. If I'm not necessary, but you love me, something's wrong with you. What are you loving? I'm not even necessary. And that's because you can't make something important by loving it. It has to be important because it's important. And then if it's important, you love it. But you can't make it important simply by loving it. So the first thing we need to teach children is that God needs you. Whether he loves you or not, well, that depends on how you behave. If you're lovable, he'll love you. If not, but he needs you. That's the important message.